Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Elisa Leroux. I'll be chairing this session today for the SAGE webinar series on why environmental management must become the new normal. And I am quite excited about our lineup. Before we get started, I'll give it another minute or so to make sure all the participants that are trying to join in are with us. And just generally speaking, for the sake of bandwidth, I suggest that people do not have their videos on just while the talk is happening, but you are very welcome after each speaker is finished to put up your hand to either speak directly and have your video on while you're asking questions, or to chat in the chat box and ask questions there. It all depends on your own connectivity and what works best for you. So while I was speaking, we have had a minute passing. We have 42 people in the audience today, and I'm sure the number might grow. So I think without further ado, I will start by introducing our first speaker. In general, today's lineup to me is very excited because we have both academics here and also practitioners, and then we have some people that are both practitioners and academics, like our first speaker here, which is Dr. Chantel Whitten. And she's a registered dietitian with more than 20 years public health nutrition experience. Chantel has a PhD in nutrition from the Northwest University Center for Excellence for Nutrition, and she is an alumnus of the African Nutrition Leadership Program. Chantel has worked across several sectors, including the food industry, the NGO sector, and with United Nations agencies. She currently serves on the National Department of Health Ministerial Committee for the morbidity and mortality of children under 5 years, and as the nutrition lead for the South African Civil Society for Women's, Adolescents and Children's Health. Chantel, that is quite a mouthful, and I am very excited to hand over to you and hear what you have to contribute. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much, Elisa, for that introduction. So thank you very much for the invitation to present to the Scientific Advisory Committee on Emergencies and to be included in a new group of people that I don't generally engage with the environmental management. Sorry guys, I'm sorry, but just jumping. So I'm not presenting a paper, I'm presenting on a community of practice, and the community of practice is in the food and nutrition world. And we are reaching out, oh my goodness, sorry. I had this problem with the jumping slides. So I'm going to be presenting particularly on the food and nutrition profile of South Africa and how that engages with environmental management. When we look at food-based dietary guidelines, which dictate what countries should be doing in terms of food production, food availability, and then obviously how it impacts us as far as consumers. And then what are the food choices currently that is driving the dietary patterns of South Africa? And when we look at consumers who don't always see themselves, they see themselves as end users, but actually if we look at consumers, consumers are actually the drivers of what gets produced, what gets marketed, and what gets taken up. And how is this related to our United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are set for 2025? And of those 17 goals, we have 3 that are specifically related to nutrition. The first one is to reduce poverty and malnutrition. We have one that talks to child nutrition and the parameters around child nutrition. And the third one talks to sustainability. So I'm trying to link many concepts, but I'm going to leave some time for more discussion, given that this is the first time I will be engaging for this particular group on these topics. So As a nutritionist and a dietitian, we look at the health outcomes. So we're often looking at the manifestation of poor dietary intake, poor food quality. And unfortunately, South Africa's food and nutrition profile cannot be ignored on the basis that we have a large poverty inequality in South Africa. From The Economist, we know that we have the highest Gini coefficient, which is just the disparity between the richest and the poorest. And the closest you get to one, the highest is that disparity. And South Africa at the moment is at 0.65, which is the highest in global terms. So what should we be paying attention to here? We should be paying attention to both the undernutrition for women, specifically our maternal anemia. Anemia is when you don't have enough iron. And WHO says that if your anemia is above 15% amongst pregnant women, then you have a problem, a public health problem. So you can see that our anemia rates are very high at 30%, which means almost 1 in 3 pregnant women are anemic, don't have enough iron intake. Then when we look at our exclusive breastfeeding rates once the babies are born, how we feed the babies. And so South Africa has the lowest exclusive breastfeeding rate on the continent and one of the lowest in a middle income country. That means only 1 in 3 children are exclusively breastfed for 0 to 6 months. And more concerning is that in 2016, from where this data is drawn from, 25%, 1 in 4 children did not breastfeed at all in the same age group. So while we have low exclusive breastfeeding rates, we also have high infant formula feeding. And then stunting, which is a global indicator that tells you how well a country is doing, looks at the height of children. And if the children are not at a healthy height for age, we call that stunting. They are too short for their age. And again, WHO sets standards. And if we are above a 15%, we are of significant public health problems. And you'll see South Africa has a high stunting rate at 27%, but also what's very concerning is that this 27% has not changed over the last 27 years. So our first national survey was in 1996. Back then, our stunting rate was 26%, and it has fluctuated between 26 and 27%. So essentially over the last 27 years, it has stayed the same. I'm going to jump over to the overnutrition. And sadly, South Africa has an obesity and an overweight problem, both in maternal nutrition, but also more worrisome is in our childhood overweight. So we see that overweight and obesity is peaking in the age group 1 to 3 years. And again, we are world leaders, unfortunately, in childhood obesity. We have surpassed the obesity levels for the USA as well as Mexico, which means that our overweight children become our overweight adolescents, and so it puts an impact on the country. So why do we have food-based dietary guidelines? So the Food and Agriculture Organization back in 1996 came together with all the countries that are signatories to the United Nations and said, we need to look at how countries are producing food, and we need to look at how countries are marketing food. And what we've seen is that not only is it the production and the marketing of food, but it is also what the consumers are demanding, what the consumers are buying, and what the consumers are almost creating the demand. And so dietary guidelines have been established since, as I said, 1996. They've been refined over the years to look at dietary patterns. We've looked at nutrient patterns, and I'm talking at a global level. So what nutrients are missing, what nutrients are too much or too little, what foods are being produced, and then how does it play out in the nutrition space. So dietary guidelines is basically for public food and nutrition policies, health and agriculture policies, so that we have healthy outcomes. Then we use also the dietary guidelines to do nutrition education. And in the nutrition education, we are trying to foster healthy eating habits and healthy lifestyles. And then finally, in the last 10 years, we've been, a lot of focus has been on sustainability and minimum impact on the environment. And I would like to give an example in terms of breastfeeding. Just because it's World Breastfeeding Week, and it is the first food. And in terms of the first food, last year, 2019, WHO, which is the World Health Organization, UNICEF, which is specifically for children, they looked at what is the impact of breastfeeding on the world in terms of sustainability. And we know that breastfeeding, production by the mother, feeding to the baby, is the shortest food system, and it has the lowest carbon footprint on the planet as a food system. It is also the first food system. This year, we are talking about protect breastfeeding, because if we are not going to be able to improve the environment for women to breastfeed, then breastfeeding rates are going to go down. And the UN has set universal targets for countries to achieve exclusive breastfeeding. That means only giving breast milk in the first 6 months. And that is 50% of all children under the age of 6 months should be exclusively breastfed. And I showed you when I started my presentation that South Africa is only at 32%, 1 in 3. For us to actually be able to meet the 50% means that we're going to have to implement accelerated efforts to move the breastfeeding agenda away from the formula and mixed feeding. So what has this got to do in terms of the impact, the production impact? I put a link for, sorry, I didn't put the reference in, but there's an article that talks about the environmental impact of formula in terms of its carbon footprint. And just as a conversion, you need 1 liter of cow's milk to produce 150 grams. So if you need to buy a 500 tin of formula, it takes raw milk of 3.3 liters. You can see that this is not a sustainable way. And if more and more women move towards formula feeding, the impact on the environment is huge. That is excluding looking at the poor health outcomes. So all those outcomes that I showed you in terms of obesity and stunting have been directly related to poor infant feeding. So let's look at how we are making our choices in the context of South Africa. As I said, we cannot ignore the economic status that we are in right now. We cannot ignore the impact that COVID has had. We cannot ignore the production and the distribution of food that has impacted because of COVID and the lockdown. And so poverty and inequality become still the main drivers for poor health. And poor people make choices on the price of food. So if the food basket is too expensive, then we will not be having the healthy diets that we want to see in South Africa. And we are paying both the cost in terms of ill health, but also we are paying future, because it's called intergenerational poverty. When a mom is in ill health, she delivers a baby that is underweight, a baby that is gestationally immature, and therefore you're paying more health costs in the future. So if we want to make these dietary choices and we want to have an impact on the environment, what is it that we need to be focusing on? How do we change this? For a very long time, the food and nutrition fraternity has focused on people's choices. But in this movement towards systems analysis, we have now galvanized around a concept called the food environment. And the food environment is the system from farm to fork. How does the food get produced? How does the food reach our shops and then finally to our table? And in understanding this farm to fork system, we have recognized and we have documented in the South African context that firstly, there's a lack of credible information, how people are making their food choices. There's a lot of misinformation. And so we need to be integrating the food and nutrition knowledge into learning programs, all learning programs for parents, for children, for consumers, and even for us as academics working in cross-sectoral or interdisciplinary contexts. I'm now going to introduce you to the food guide for South Africa. So you'll see that the food guide for South Africa starts with a circle in the middle, focusing very much on the starchy foods. And if I asked anybody now, what would be the one recommendation if you wanted to eat healthy? 90% of people, and this is the HSRC survey, said that starchy food is bad for you. Starchy food makes you fat. Starchy foods gives you diabetes. Starchy foods um, make you gain weight. And yet, starchy foods across the globe is the basis of the diet, healthy diet. So if you look at people in China, what do they eat? People in Ghana, people in Mexico, globally, starchy foods provide maximum energy. And it is also the most economic and cost-effective energy from a physiological point of view. Because all our starchy foods, when we eat it, it converts to our glucose, which then supplies the body with energy. So in a sense, South Africa should be focusing on how to diversify the starchy food base so that its population doesn't have to spend additional money, doesn't have to spend money on foods that are not providing that energy but are still expensive. And why am I raising this? Is because 5 years ago, South Africa went through a huge transition in terms of discussing the banting diet. And was the banting diet a public health strategy for South Africa? And it cannot be, because the banting diet focuses on protein. And if you look at the protein circles, you see the protein circles are very small because, one, they are the most expensive foods, they are the high quality foods, but physiologically, they are also the foods that do not provide cost effective energy. They are building blocks, and so they are the smallest. I want to focus on the fruits and vegetables because this is an area that we can improve. This is an area that South Africa does produce enough fruits and vegetables, but the consumption pattern of the population is not on fruits and vegetables. In terms of consumption, WHO says we should be eating 400 grams of plant-based foods, which should come from fruits and vegetables, and South Africa only consumes 240. So we should all be eating 5 portions of fruits and vegetables every day. But if we look at the research, it shows that fruits and vegetables are very low on the consumer's list. One, because it's expensive, and two, it's not part of our usual dietary intake. We focus a lot on the high quality foods. If you ask a mom, what is good foods to feed your child? She will always mention the high quality foods, milk, eggs, yogurt. So these are the foods that are foremost in consumers' minds. But again, when we look at the environmental impact, if as a population we were pushing for more people to eat fish, we would actually exhaust our fish stocks. We would not be able to um, get our population to eat at the levels that we need to produce. So that's why we are focusing on the plant-based foods, which include your fruits and vegetables, your legumes. And then finally, a positive note for South Africa is that South Africa, like many other countries, has put in regulations to control the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. And some research has shown now that we are finally turning the curve in terms of consumption of water. And that's why water conservation, water purification, water management is important, because it has an impact also on agriculture, and then finally on the consumption of the consumer. And so promotion of water and water-based drinks, we are finally winning the war against sugar-sweetened drinks. So that's very positive. So this particular food-based guideline has been in existence since 2003. But what we have seen across the different sectors, including education, basic education, higher education, including sports, where lots of sports nutrition is given out, is that we have not used it consistently as a public health tool. We've not been able to apply the South African food guide and food guidance in a way that makes sense to the different sectors, from the food production, food marketing, and food consumption. And even when we think about environmental management in terms of food production, then when we look at the nutrition and what is pushing the production, then nutrition is very low on the list. Most people just are counting what is the production, but not looking at what is the impact on the people. And as I showed in the beginning, the health profile is really deteriorating with time. And so both as a community of practice as academics, but also as the government, trying to move the consumption patterns of South Africa towards the food guide is paramount for us to reap the benefits of health. Oops. My slides are standing. Prof. Eliza, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Are you
I'm not
frozen?
sure why I can't even escape to change slides.
Oh dear. Do you have a few slides left?
It's
Maybe
two slides that are left. I'm going to stop sharing. So just to go back in terms of South Africa, oh, it is changing. Is it changing for you as well?
I
On
cannot
Zoom?
see anything. I just see you at the moment, but I think you can probably just talk through the last slide.
Yeah, I'm gonna change. I'm just gonna, it's the last two slides. Okay, so in terms of the healthy eating, what are we pushing for? We're pushing for more variety, and as I said, the starchy foods we still want to focus on. So we're looking at diversifying from maize and wheat and trying to improve the consumption of sorghum, millet, barley, teff, and we are looking at how this may change our dietary patterns. Another area that needs a lot of research and a lot of support is the promotion of indigenous vegetables and fruit, mostly known as the forgotten vegetables, because there used to be a huge market for green leafy vegetables in our northern provinces, but we see that that's also decreased significantly over time. So trying to get these to market and trying to market these as sources for consumption, as commercial consumption, is another area that we are focusing on. And then an alternative to animal source foods that is taking off is looking at insects and other bugs and alternative food sources, because again, the protein foods are very expensive. And if we want to improve the quality of foods for children specifically, then meat and meat products are proving to be very expensive. And the Asian countries have done very well to include alternative meat sources. This is a diagram that is promoted by the World Health Organization in terms of looking at how do we get food from production. So we're looking at from the policies that look at how much we should be producing in South Africa. And unfortunately, South Africa is still very much focused on the production of staples, and we haven't yet diversified towards our fruits and vegetables, as I was talking. And if you look at the outer ring of the yellow ring, these are the tools that we're using to move the system of food production to food consumption. Because South Africa is spending a lot of money on the blue ring. We are investing in, when we look at the health outcomes in terms of malnutrition, that is where most of the money is going. And in terms of our efforts, South Africa needs to go back to look at a systems approach. And we are looking at this farm to fork approach. And all sectors that may engage in any of these systems should be pushing in the same direction if we want to see the changes we are talking about. So to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we need to do more knowledge brokering. This is an action given by WHO and FAO. And as the nutrition and food communities, we are trying to do that for all sectors and agencies that are working in the food and health sector. In the health sector, we are particularly working on the double burden. And that double burden is stunting in children and overweight in adults. And it's the same, it is in the same household. So therefore, the food patterns is our answer. Increased nutrition capacity. In the WHO guidelines, we are not talking about training more nutritionists and dietitians, but we're actually asking for more nutrition to be included in academic programs where people do engage with food and nutrition, and then finally as consumers and health consumers as well. We are strengthening the advocacy to support the food and nutrition, specifically through the COVID recovery phase, because during COVID, we saw a large attention to households that were running without food. And that is exacerbating the burden of food insecurity in South Africa. And so therefore, COVID has given us the opportunity to start engaging. And we're looking for more opportunities to monitor and document initiatives that are rolling out, especially in terms of the small scale farmers, food initiatives that are happening. And for us and the local communities that are engaged in food and nutrition is to actually have a coordinated approach so that we have the academic lens for writing up these community-led opportunities, and for us to use it as local knowledge so that we may impact at a global level. As I said, for all countries signatory to the UN, we've all committed that we will reduce hunger and we will improve child nutrition for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chantel. That was fascinating. I have so many questions popping up in my head. I really appreciate your presentation. I feel like I'd like to give others a chance to ask questions, but since I'm lucky enough to perhaps have the floor for now, I am particularly intrigued because from environmental and from a zoological perspective, of course, we're very aware of how the current COVID pandemic was caused by zoonosis, and that has been driven to a large extent by our meat consumption patterns and the fact that we, pack animals into, meat, battery chicken into battery, and feedlots and things like that. So our demand is driving the risk for increased future zoonotic pandemics. And then, as you say, the recommendations are actually that we shouldn't be focusing so much on animal-based foods, right? Mm-hmm. How do you think we can use COVID, the current, crisis, to help drive change towards a more plant-based diet, where the viruses that emerge from plants are not so threatening to us, basically?
Yes, thank you, Elisa. I think I see Stephanie's also asked the question about animal products. So I think COVID has really brought nutrition into sharp focus because now the communication is much wider. It's in the media. People are learning a lot more about the risk of obesity and malnutrition, particularly in adults. And so we have this opportunity now. In terms of protein consumption, it's also a cultural perspective, especially as South Africans. If you go anywhere and you talk about food, people are more likely to tell you, hey, we had this lekker braai, and focus on the chops rather than on the, the millipap that was served with it. When people talk about, status, they will usually use food because they know that food has a very high, and protein specifically have high quality status symbols. So we have to move the needle cautiously towards more plant-based. But I think it was because plant-based, especially the starchy foods, got a very bad rap. Most people believe that starchy foods make you fat. And so when people cut down on the starches, they automatically have to, increase somewhere else. So it's usually, give me a little bit of rice and 2 pieces of meat. And the reality is that the guidelines have not been used to kind of push this cultural change that we need. But also it does mean that we need to have consumers buying and asking for more fruits and vegetables. And I think when everybody starts talking the same message, I think South Africa can get there.
I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Quite a few other questions coming, but unfortunately we're going to have to move on to the next speaker too, because I know we don't want to run too much over our time. Chantel, if you have the mental energy to pay attention to the chat box, you could also try to answer some questions from the chat box, perhaps in the interest of time, or otherwise, of course, we can put people in touch afterwards for more questions and answers, even on the Facebook site later, where this will all be posted. So thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is from my institution, the University of the Free State here in Kwakwa. It's Professor Jeffrey Mukwada, who will be talking about environmental management as the new normal towards a framework for the COVID-19 pandemic analysis. Now, Jeffrey is a professor of environmental geography. He holds a master's degree in environmental policy and planning from the University of Zimbabwe and a PhD in environmental geography from the University of the Witwatersrand. He also holds professional qualifications in education, human resource management, and project management. Now, Jeffrey's main research interests are in climate change, natural resource management, and rural livelihoods, especially in mountain environments, which is where we are now. During his spare time, he enjoys reading fiction, politics, and philosophy, and I really look forward to your talk, Jeffrey. I hope you'll be able to share your screen with us, and please let us know if, yep, I see your screen sharing is starting. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon,
First of all, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this event, Professor Lelu and Dr. Naidu. My talk this afternoon is on environmental management as the new normal towards the framework for the COVID-19 pandemic analysis. I would like to start with two press statements that were made on the 5th of July 2021 by the elders. For those who are not familiar with who the elders are those people or club of former political leaders, especially prime ministers and presidents. One of them is Mary Robinson, who is the current chairperson, who noted that COVID-19 must not be seen as a health crisis alone. It is a political, economic, social, and human rights crisis, and the consequences of both the virus and the disastrous failures of international leaders since the beginning of 2020 will be felt for many years to come. Another statement came from Gro Harlem Brundtland, the former Norwegian Prime Minister and former Director General of the World Health Organization, who stated the world stands at a critical moment in its response to the pandemic and its attempt to prevent future disasters. Thus far, the record of heads of state has been almost uniformly inadequate, and the response of the G7 rich industrialized countries at their recent summit in the United Kingdom was particularly disappointing. Ladies and gentlemen, these two excerpts are telling in a number of ways, and there are 5 conclusions that I could draw from these statements. The first one is that the pandemic is multidimensional, and the second is that the consequences of the continuous spreading of the pandemic are disastrous. Thirdly, the world is divided in its capacity to deal with the problem, and the most noticeable being the division between the poor and the rich countries. And fourthly, there are ethical concerns, including human rights issues. And the last is that there is dissatisfaction regarding how the pandemic is being handled. But first of all, what is it that we know about the COVID-19 pandemic? The first thing that we know for sure is that the causative agent of COVID-19 is SARS-CoV-2. That is what we know. Secondly, what we also know is that it is spreading rapidly. In January 2020, there were only 282 cases. A year later, the number of cases that were reported rose to over 81 million. And 6 months afterwards, there was an increase by another 100 million. After which, within the last 30 days, it rose by almost another 20 million, which is phenomenal. What we also do is that if geographic spread is uneven, by looking at this map here, you can tell differences in different parts of the continent of the world, of the number of cases that were reported and the deaths that resulted from the pandemic. That is one thing that we know. However, there's a lot more that we do not know. The first thing that we don't know is the origins of this problem. That is the first thing that we do not know. And controversies and speculations surrounding the origins of COVID-19 are fertile grounds for conspiracy theories, and I would like to believe that we have heard many of them, one of which suggests that COVID-19 escaped from a laboratory experiment that went wrong. A typical example cited in this case is the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, where the virus is alleged to have escaped from a laboratory. Another view or claim is that there are some pharmaceutical corporations that engineer the virus, thus genetically modifying it in order to make a killing on profit. Yet we also hear of other suggestions that maintain that some scientists have intentions of altering the human genome, either by creating the virus or through the vaccines that are being developed. So all these are concerns that you have heard about. There is also a theory that is related to archaeology, suggesting that the virus may have been let out from an old archaeological site, which could have been an old burial site or a tomb, perhaps dating back to one of the ancient civilizations. These are the things that are being peddled as a result of what we don't know about the COVID pandemic. Also, what we don't know about the COVID pandemic are the emerging trends. There is hardly much that we know about how it is spreading. As of the 26th of July, 2021, the figures across the world were as follows. If you look at these figures here, you can tell where most of the human population has been affected. But this virus is not limited to the human population only. It is also affecting even livestock and other animals. What is interesting, though, to note is that even though the first cases were reported in China, it is in China that probably some of the smallest numbers have been reported of late. By the week ending preceding the 26th of July, 2021, the statistics were as followed. The number of people who were infected by the virus, starting from Brazil, especially in the BRICS countries, varied phenomenally. If you make a comparison again, you can see that the numbers are huge. All these numbers were reported in just 1 week. And again, what we notice is that there are very few cases that were reported in China compared to other parts of the world. And one wonders why this is the case. And secondly, why is it that the rest of the world is so proud not to learn from what is happening in China by way of controlling the spread of the virus? These are the questions that come into my mind when I start thinking about how we can frame our understanding of how the COVID pandemic crisis is affecting humanity. The other thing that we don't know is a response to this concern by Brundtland. We need urgent action and delivery, not just on vaccine production and distribution. Now, the question, what is really unknown here is what urgent action is needed? What urgent action can we take? Now, in order to arrive at some questions and answers related to that particular question, we need to have some kind of a frame. A frame, by definition, is a cognitive device that can be used as an interpretive lens through which we can see and make sense of the complex situations that is portrayed by the pandemic crisis. Now, what came into my mind when I was thinking about how to frame the pandemic, a total of 10 possible frameworks. The first one being the Ecological framework for action, which was proposed in 2005 at the World Conference on Disaster Reduction in Japan. And this conference was on building resilience of nations and communities to disasters. And they came up with 3 recommendations at that conference. The first one is that there has got to be adequate assessment of risks associated with disasters. And secondly, there has to be some management of this risk, but both the risk assessment and the risk management need to be communicated, which was the third recommendation. Now, looking at this, we cannot shy away from the reality that when we are dealing with the COVID pandemic, we are dealing with a disaster. We are dealing with a disaster, and what needs to be done is to find a way of assessing this risk and its risks, and also how to manage the risk and communicate about the two. The second framework that came into my mind as well was Mode 2 science, which was proposed by Michael Gibson, Helga Nowotny, and Peter Scott in 1994. Now, unlike Mode 1 science, Mode 2 science suggests that we must have a new paradigm of knowledge production that is socially sensitive, application-oriented, transdisciplinary, as well as one that allows for those who peddle information to be held accountable. Now, it is unlike in Mode 1 science. In Mode 1 science, emphasis is on gathering empirical evidence for trends and patterns of phenomena identified, which is, of course, discredited by other for a number of reasons, one of which is that it tends to be hegemonic because it forces people to focus on theoretical and experimental science, and also locks people in disciplinary silos. Now, having said this, I want to quickly move on to the next possible framework, which is the post-normal science, which was proposed by Fundoisky and others in 1991. In post-normal science, we see science being divided into three major domains, including applied science and then what is referred to as post-normal science. In between, we got a professional consultant's form of science. They are in a continuum whereby applied science assumes the lowest value in terms of decision-making, whereas post-normal science is that kind of science which comes after the normal science and is found to be the one that is most desirable in terms of decision-making. The next one that I want to allude to very briefly is techno-fixes, which was mooted by Rev. Dow and Rahman in 2020. In this approach, it is assumed that all our answers, things that we need, especially in relation to the current pandemic crisis, should be coming from engineering and technology. That is where solution can be found. While this may be true, it can also be equally argued that it is probably engineering and science that may have taken us to the current crisis in which we are. And the next one that I would like to refer to very briefly also is the user-driven innovation, which was proposed by von Hypel in 2005. According to this approach, innovators must work directly with users in order to produce new knowledge and also to produce new products through co-creation, customization, and crowdsourcing. Now, we may already have seen a number of new technologies emerging on the market as a result of the current crisis. For example, we now have sanitizer dispensers of all makes and kinds. We now have some ventilation machines of all design. And also, alongside these developments, we have seen decoctions and concoctions being proposed and developed in line with the knowledge systems in different parts of the world. The last one, before I focus on what I think is ideal and which should be understood in a better way, is the social innovation approach. And this is what was mooted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, as well as the Bureau of European Policy Advisors, who refer to social innovation as the design and implementation of new solutions that imply conceptual process, product, and organizational change that will benefit individuals and the societies or communities in which they live. Now, when I look at these first six possible frameworks, what comes into my mind is that traditional science in general is seen as not enough and is seen as limited and powerless in providing solutions to the current pandemic crisis. And society might have to turn to esoteric knowledge systems in order to find answers. Just a few quick questions that I would like to raise before I move on to the last four frameworks. The questions that need to be addressed in any analytical framework are as follows. Number one, how serious is the problem that needs to be addressed? And secondly, how is it affecting us? And thirdly, how can it be addressed? And lastly, how do we manage our environment under the threat posed by the problem? These are the questions that I'm going to try to answer using the last four proposed frameworks. Now, all these four are based on systems thinking, and by definition, a system is made up with an integral component of parts, which in turn are made up of objects, elements, each of which have got attributes, and these attributes are rooted in the biophysical, economic, political, and social domains, which makes the whole system complicated. For example, as an illustration here, when we look at the pandemic crisis within the context of systems approach, what we see is the interconnectedness of issues, including contamination of the environment that leads to the transmission of the disease to people, and the transmission of events leading to changes in the populations, or leading to people who will be affected as a result of vulnerability or susceptibility. We see that all these things do happen in the environment as a result of what will be happening through the interaction between the different spheres of the environment, including the biophysical, social, economic, and political environment, the decisions that are made there, which might actually lead to the spread and worsening of the situation. All right. This is why those elders were complaining and raising issues about how the current situation is not being handled properly. But having said this, let me just move on to the first theoretical framework that answers the first question that I raised earlier. How serious is this problem? And to answer this question, we must turn to the wicked problems, which was proposed by Reiter and Weber in 1973. According to this framework, the origin of a problem which is referred to as a wicked problem is usually not known, or it is usually not clear. In this particular case, what we notice about the COVID pandemic is that the virus responsible for this pandemic is not clearly known. It's not known where it actually came from. Its origins are not known. Hello?
Jesse, can I just interrupt you? We are a bit running tight on time. If you can wrap that up in the next minute, that would be great. Otherwise, we might not fit in all of the speakers. Thank you.
Okay. How much more time do I have?
No, you're actually over time already. So if you can wrap up in a minute, that would be great.
Okay, let me sum up. What I intended to do was introduce you to 4 critical things. One of them is about the first question: how serious is this problem? We are talking about something that we don't quite understand sufficiently. And secondly, we're going to look into how the population in general, the human population, is affected by referring to yet another important theory, world systems theory. It was going to address the question, how is this pandemic affecting us? And another thing that I was going to do, if time had allowed me, was to relate the current risk to the conditions that characterize the environment, that is the vulnerability of those who are affected, and the characteristics of the hazards. Because the risk is directly proportional to these two, but also inversely proportional to the capacity of those affected. I was also going to relate to the characteristics of the hazards. And lastly, the most important thing that I was going to refer to was how we can manage the current crisis and also prepare for future crises of the same nature using the BBC model. And the last thing, if you may allow me just to read out a few statements by way of conclusion, is that any framework that should be adopted must, first of all, address these several things that are not known about the COVID pandemic. Secondly, I was going to say that the pandemic poses a huge risk, not only to life, but also to livelihoods. And thirdly, the pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on society, particularly the difference that exists between the developed and the developing world. The fourth is that at any level or scale, a unified approach must be adopted in order to arrive at the solution to this problem. Fifthly, I was also going to say there is need for a holistic approach, which is both systematic and systemic. Lastly, because of our lack of preparedness, it would be necessary to have a comprehensive emergency management approach in which we have, when we fail to prepare, we have got at least to respond adequately to the disaster so that we recover and at the same time, finally, we need to have a change of mindset so that we become more resilient, focused, with the aim of building better what has already been lost. Thank you, Chair, for...
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I appreciate the talk. Sorry that I had to cut you short, but we are packing in so much in this webinar series. And as you'd rightly say, this is an absolutely complex systems level and novel challenge. I ask that participants please ask questions in the chat box for Jeffrey, or afterwards you can also go onto Facebook and see if you have more questions, you can pose them there. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, which is Matlori Tau. He is a director at SANBI, responsible for the Biodiversity Mainstreaming Directorate. His key responsibility is to lead SANBI's program of work on mainstreaming biodiversity and ecological infrastructure into a range of strategic sectors, including rural development, the water sector, and agriculture. His expertise is in the field of environmental governance, biodiversity conservation, CBNRM, transformative innovative planning, and working at the confluence of the science policy interface. Matlori and his team, they're currently working on a WRC-funded project, the Living Catchments Project, which is intended to strengthen the enabling environment for water governance in South Africa. And Matlori holds an MSc in Grassland Science from UKZN. Thank you, Matlori. I'm happy for you to take over and share your screen with us. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Prof. Are you able to see my screen, and am I also audible?
At the moment, I'm not sure if I'm still seeing. Yes, there we go. Your screen is now visible, and you're audible. Thank you. All right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. As Aliza said, Matlodi from I'm with the South African National Biodiversity Institute. It's an agency of the Department of Environmental Affairs. Well, the name has changed. It's DFFE. I'm going to talk about the journey that we've been taking since some time back, a while back, on investing in ecological infrastructure for water security. I kept my presentation at a much higher level, simple, higher level. I wasn't sure of the audience, so I hope what I'm going to share with you, you'll be able to follow and understand. This is just an overview of my presentation. So starting with what is it that we're talking about here when we talk about the concept of investing in ecological infrastructure? What is it about? We are saying ecological infrastructure, it refers to naturally functioning ecosystems that generate and deliver valuable services to people. This concept started some time back, where we were looking at, where we were saying, as the biodiversity sector, SANBI, our mandate is on biodiversity conservation, monitoring, reporting to the minister and to the people of South Africa. How can we change our messaging to the people of South Africa to understand what we are all about, so also demonstrate our value as SANBI, and we are in the biodiversity sector, and we know our relevancy to the development agenda of the country. So that's where this concept is coming from, that people are familiar with the built infrastructure because they're able to see the roads, the bridges, the dams. They can see that, but we needed to find a way of communicating the messaging of biodiversity benefits, and ecological infrastructure made so much sense, and we're able to say it is an equivalent of the built infrastructure that you are used to, is just as important, and these are our rivers, our wetlands, our mountain catchments. And when we're saying we need to invest in ecological infrastructure, we are saying we want to mobilize communities, we want to mobilize the citizens of South Africa towards maintaining the functioning of this infrastructure, the ecological infrastructure, the functioning of our rivers. We can't lose the function of our rivers, of our mountain catchments. We need to maintain those. And where there's degradation, we need to rehabilitate those because they are just as important. So that's where the concept of ecological infrastructure is coming from. And we've been working on communicating the case for investing in ecological infrastructure, because we were moving away from the messaging of biodiversity. Biodiversity is threatened. We have endemic plants here, they are threatened. People are not getting it, because our target was we recognize that a large strength of our land, of what we call critical biodiversity areas, it's in the hands of the private sector, in the hands of the production sector. How do we then communicate our benefits and show our relevance into the production sector? And we came up with this whole range of messaging to link it also to not just talk about the ecosystem services that are coming out, but to say
yes, land management intervention is important. Yes, ecosystem services. Through sustainable land management, what you get is improved ecosystem services, but it doesn't end there. It leads to improved human well-being. And we were trying to find the linkages of the work that we are doing to addressing the societal challenges that we are sitting with as a country. So to make that linkages very clearly. So that's what we've been working on. We know about the sustainable development goals, our 2030 agenda. This will always be a work in progress. You can feel it. We can feel all of it in terms of the benefit of EI, to say how does it links to our SDGs. Anyone who, it depends on which sector you're sitting in, or are you from, and your understanding of ecological infrastructure. You can be able to see the linkages of the concept of investing in ecological infrastructure and how it contributes towards our 2030 agenda. So it's that conversations that we were having. And for us to say, we were saying, how can we do this better? We got the concept, we are doing the messaging, we are receiving tractions, but how do we actually go out there and make this even more visible? The concept of investing in ecological infrastructure. We started we started with, we said what we need to do is to establish these catchment-based partnerships. So we know that in all the catchments that we are in, you have NGOs, you have researchers, you have communities, government department, or all spheres of government. You found them in all these catchments, and they are all doing, they can actually coordinate and march towards a common vision. So that was what we were saying, that let's all come together. Let's all have this vision that we all aspire to achieve, and we all march together. And we started this in KwaZulu-Natal with the establishment of Umgeni Ecological Infrastructure Partnership, because we believe that we need to move away from I am Sanbi, I am KZN Wildlife, and this is what I do. But we need to say, I am Sanbi, I'm KZN Wildlife, I am Umgeni, I am eThekwini, I am University of KwaZulu-Natal. When we come together, what is our common vision around investing in ecological infrastructure? And we were very particular in terms of the work that we want to do. It was the focus. We wanted to focus more on water security. We know that water underpins the development agenda of this country. We can't do anything without water. Our economy needs water to grow. And we know that South Africa is a water scarce country. Those who've been following what's happening in the water sector, we have serious water challenges right now. And with the Department of Water and Sanitation telling us that by 2030, we will have a serious, significant deficit of about 17% unless we do something now. So it was very important for us, SANBI, being from the biodiversity sector, trying to demonstrate our relevance to the societal challenges. And we chose the water sector and the water challenges that we are currently facing, and what is it that we can proactively do now. And these catchment-based partnerships that we led the establishment of the one in Umgeni, and with that came the Umzimvubu Catchment Partnership. Some may be familiar with it. It's in the Eastern Cape. We were part of that to say, let's start working together. Let's start closing the feedback loop between scientists, practitioners, implementers on the ground, and policy practitioners. So these partnerships are really about that. And through, as when I was introduced, talking about the Living Catchments Project, we not only in Umzimvubu, but we are now also in the Upper Tugela, that's in KwaZulu-Natal, the Breede catchments and the Olifants, really trying to enhance the catchment governance, because it's the only way for us to move forward. Is about let's let's work together. And also what is important is that we know that through good water governance, we believe that good water governance, it also will also eliminate the inequalities. We still need to put some evidence into that, but we believe it does. And through the catchment partnerships that we have established, what we have is what we call the learning platforms. Yes, you can establish this catchment partnership, and we can all come together and develop a strategy, and it ends there. But that's not how we want to operate. That's not how we should be working. It's through these catchment-based partnerships. What we need is to create a space for learning, a space for co-learning, a space for co-creation of solutions. So we all come together. The communities, we close the feedback loop. The scientists are saying, what are the research needs in this particular catchment? So these spaces that we are creating, they are exactly for that. What's coming out of the research findings, if there's a way that can find its way into policy development processes, that's what we want to see, to facilitate the uptake of the work that our scientists are doing. We want to see that into policies, but we also want to see practitioners, what's coming out with the best practices from the, so these learning platforms are really, they are created for that, and they are in various catchments. As I said, in Umgeni, Mzimvubu, Berg Briede, we are starting now in Upper Dugela and the Olifants, but we need to close that. We need to close the gap, the feedback loop, so and facilitate the we become like knowledge brokers of the science policy practice interface. So we get everybody together. That's the idea, and we do that at catchments. After every 2 years, we have what we call the ecological infrastructure endeavor, for us to create a space for learning, a space for co-creation of solutions, the space of adaptive management. That is what we believe we need to be doing for us to say, indeed, we are investing in ecological infrastructure for water securities. We cannot ignore the work that, in particular, the civil societies are doing in all these catchments, where they are mobilizing communities into actions. And our role there at SANBI is to say, bring those communities in, bring them into these partnerships. Let's hear what they're doing. Not only that, let's go and see what these communities are doing. And the platforms that we've created, they serve that purpose. So it's really, it's all of us. We need each other when we talk about the water security crisis in the country. Well, we cannot stop there. We need to be influencing planning and policies. We know that our government departments, they need a mandate to act on anything. They need, they're guided by the policies, they're guided by their plans for them to be able to implement anything. And what we were saying is that with these catchment partnerships, that because now we are demonstrating the value of investing in ecological infrastructure, and we were able to see the uptake of this concept into various planning policy processes, which really make us very happy. This is just an example. There are many where we can actually see now ecological infrastructure recognized in various policy processes, ecological infrastructure becoming more recognized into planning, because that's also important. While we are mobilizing on the ground, what are we saying about the mandates? Is it shifting? Can we shift the mandates of these government departments, in particular, either being water and sanitation, or it's rural development, or our own Department of Environmental Affairs? And with the concept of investing in ecological infrastructure, it was just really about that. It's on the ground, but also looking at influencing planning and policies This is just an example of what is currently happening in KwaZulu-Natal on the development of the proto catchment management strategy. There's a lot of science that goes into this in terms of the mapping, the natural capital account. This is where it becomes so important now. So now what we are seeing is us as SANBI really working with scientists, and the scientists are providing we are seeing a direct benefits of the scientific work into policies and strategies. And this is how we want to say, if we talk about water security, this is how it should be done. And this is just one of the many examples in terms of what we are doing in various catchments. We want to see what will come up out of the work that we're doing now, particularly in Olifants, if we can be able also to influence our policy processes, strategic plans, maybe of the local municipalities there, bring them on board. What are they doing? How can we work together? Bring in the scientists. This is what we have. This is what goes. So those learning platforms that we are talked about, they are exactly for that, to open up conversations so that we move together, we march together. Equally important is on influencing an inclusive green economy. We really, what is at the center of an inclusive green economy is that it has to be people-centered. We know the green economy, from what you read, is about improving the human well-being, build social equity, reducing environmental risk, and through the journey that what we've embarked on for some time, what is emerging right now is very impressive. We love what is emerging around the work that we're doing. We're saying now, if we can invest in our strategic water source area, remember what I said, ecological infrastructure, our mountain catchments, these are ecological, they are our EI, and so the mountain catchments, if we invest in these mountain catchments, we know they are powering our economy. And if we were to talk about the green economy, this is just another way of the many ways of explaining the green economy. But if we can see an investment into these mountain catchments, we will indeed say our economy is marching towards a green economy, because now we will be investing in ecological infrastructure. And we are very happy with what is happening now. We have a target in the medium-term strategic framework of the DFFE to secure 11 strategic water source areas. These are the mountain catchments, and this is where we're going to start. This is us, DFFE. This project, SANBI is supporting, providing technical support, but it's led by DFFE and DWS, and we are mobilizing civil societies, other government departments to be part of this what we've now started. And remember what I talked about, the partnerships, the learning platforms. What is great now is that as SANBI and partners are in this catchment, we are laying the ground for this work already. So when the DFFE is saying we are starting this work, we will say as partners, SANBI and partners, we already galvanized communities. We have these partnerships. It's really now about just doing we're going to hit the ground running. And this is where our green economy, as part of our contributions, the green economy will look like as a start. And because we need to secure this, and securing this is not really, doesn't just mean protection. It's protection and many other things that we need to be doing in this space. It's kind of being protection, protecting this mountain, legally protecting them. It's the partnerships, is the rehabilitation work, is the financing, it's all of that. That's so we have started on this journey. We are trying to develop this strategic water source area roadmap. We want to see how it will look like. we need to understand when we mean we want to secure these strategic water source areas as part of powering our green economy. How will that look like? And so the work that we've started, just creating learning platforms, we can see the uptake now, which is, this is what we want to see. But having said all the nice things, work in progress, a social learning process on changing the way people make choices about the role of ecosystem in the water supply chain. This is very important. This is ongoing in terms of how can we integrate ecological infrastructure into the planning, the financing, and the development of the build infrastructure. Because it's nice to say what I've said, but this is where we are at. And this is what we want to see EI, because when we say government has allocated billions of rands to the building of the dam, and we are saying, can part of that be allocated towards maintaining ecological infrastructure, toward rehabilitating ecological infrastructure, as you've seen from my slides, the ecosystem services that are coming out of our EEI, water is one of them. Can we work together there? And that's where we are at. And
Sorry, thank you very much. I see there are already questions popping up for you in the chat box.
Okay.
I think we should try to move on to the next, our final speaker for the day. There's a lot of food for thought here, and I think
you. This was the last slide.
Oh, okay, brilliant.
Okay, let me acknowledge my funders, the GEF, Department of Science and Innovation, and Water Reserve. All that I've said is funded by these organizations. Thanks, sir.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mahlori. And you're going to have your hands full answering all those questions in the chat box. I'd love it if you can turn your attention there. We won't have time now for verbal Q&A, but I'd love to. But thank you so much. I love the bottom-up approach. It's definitely reaping fruit. Thank you, everyone. Our next speaker is Prof. Shola Ololade. She holds a PhD in environmental management from the University of Joburg, and she's an associate professor at the University of the Free State. Her areas of expertise include land use, land cover analysis, water, energy, food nexus, and environmental sustainability. Shola has co-authored or authored 36 peer-reviewed journal articles, 6 book chapters, and 6 peer-reviewed conference proceedings. She supervised and graduated 19 masters and 2 PhD students. Shola is also regularly a reviewer for more than 15 international journals and has presented 24 conference papers, 20 of which are international conference, and 6 of them have been an invited guest speaker. And of course, you are an invited guest speaker to our webinar series here today. Thank you for being here. The floor is now yours.
Okay, thanks, Eliza. I'll just try and share my screen right now. Just let me know whether we can see my screen.
Yes, you're visible and audible.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just going to, first of all, use this opportunity to thank Professor Leroux and Dr. Naidu for inviting me to be one of the speakers in this web seminar. And I must say it's been an interesting one. I joined last week as well, and I've been gaining a lot from the speakers. I see my slide is trying to run faster than me, you know? Sorry, I'm just going to go back to the beginning. So I will be talking about the pathway towards climate mitigation and resilience, that it requires a transdisciplinary approach. So in essence, I'm saying that the way we were doing it in the past needs to change if we are going to actually achieve a lot of success in terms of climate mitigation. So I'm going to just, on this slide, I'm going to give a brief background to my presentation. The world is facing a rapid climate change with different effects on different sectors. So whether it's the water sector, energy sector, agriculture, food, even transport, talking about any sectors, so basically climate changes have an overall effect on all those sectors. So, and because of this impact, we are seeing heat waves, flood, wildfires, drought, and loss of the biodiversity, just to name a few, that are the effects of this climate change. And when you open the news on a daily basis, this is what you see. You hear about flood killing people, heat waves here and there, so it's not a new thing that this thing is happening. So it's actually a reality. And one of the consequences of this is that it can disrupt national economies and also affect lives of millions of people, especially the poor populations. The poorer population are those people that are going to be more vulnerable to the effects of our climate change. And according to IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have until 2030, to cut down anthropogenic sources of carbon dioxide. And now we are in 2021, so that means that we have 9 years more to go. So I don't know how we'll be able to achieve this, because the time is nearer than we thought. And also for us also to be able to avoid even worse effect of climate change, these things has to be put in place. And also it was projected that by 2050, carbon dioxide emissions should reach net zero, where emissions are in balance with removers. So in essence, the amount of carbon dioxide being released into the environment, should be equal to the amount being removed from the environment. So how are we going to achieve this in 2050? It's going to be less than a miracle, and if we are not careful, this is going to be even a much worse pandemic than even the COVID-19. So this is just a graph showing the carbon dioxide emission based on the G20 countries. And you will see the red on this slide, the red bar is showing the world average of carbon dioxide emissions. I don't know why my thing is running faster than me, okay? And so basically you will see that most of the developed countries, are actually emitting a lot of carbon dioxide into the environment. And South Africa is also a culprit. So also the emission from South Africa is also above the world average as well. And this tells us that actually some countries really need to work on how they are going to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide being emitted into the environment. Now, this particular slide is showing the global land risk according to the World Economic Forum. And if you look at on the right-hand side, the green diamond shows the most severe likelihood of risk. And sorry, I don't know why my slide is running faster than me. Sorry about that. So we see that the green aspect, we see climate action failure, biodiversity loss, extreme weather, natural disaster, human-made environmental disaster. Those are going to be the major things that we really need to focus on, in terms of averting a pandemic in future and the severe impacts of climate change. And you also see that water crisis is also a huge concern, which the previous speaker also talked about. So what is climate mitigation? So it's these measures that we need to take to reduce the effect and risk of climate change. And it also involves reduction of anthropogenic emissions, which we humans actually contribute to, and also reducing the concentration of these anthropogenic emissions in the atmosphere. So basically the sectors that we need to actually focus on in terms of climate mitigation, it's transport. One of it is transport. So what is it? What kind of fuel are we using? In terms of the transport mode that we use, is it mass transport? And are people living far away from where they're staying, which means that they're going to travel a longer distance and they're going to emit greenhouse gases into the environment. Forest and land use, we're clearing our forest to make way, to pave way for agriculture, to pave way for expansion of urban areas. And also we need to think about how can we do reforestation, how can we actually, restore degraded forest as well. So those are the things that we need to really focus on. Agriculture and food, agriculture, we need to think about using organic fertilizer instead of using inorganic fertilizer. So research has to be done into that. We need to think about how we can start using drought-resistant planting drought-resistant foods. Those are the things we need to think about. So also in terms of industry as well, what kind of energy is being used in our industry, So we need to be also energy efficient and also reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we are giving into the environment. Our energy as well, what is the source of our energy? We need to see how we can shift to more renewable energy, also to avoid releasing a high amount of greenhouse gases in the environment. Our buildings and our cities has to be energy efficient, for us to be able to reduce greenhouse gases in the environment. We need to start insulating our buildings. We need to start making sure that when we are building our buildings, we need to make sure that maybe they can face the direction of the sun, and start thinking about also using more energy, switch off the light, also training people about how to use and be more energy efficient. And also in terms of the planning of our cities, how do we plan our cities? Do we make it like the broad plan cities, or we make it more compact? So those are the things that we really need to think about in terms of the climate mitigation. So what about climate resilience? So how can we actually implement climate resilience? That is the potential of a system, whether it's social or ecological, to overcome and recover from the effects of a natural disaster. And I must say many countries, especially in Africa, are not climate, sorry about that, are not climate resilient. So now, how do we go about doing this? Now, building resilience requires combined strategies to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change, while also promoting sustainable development. Yes, we need to be sustainable, but in doing that, we need to make sure that whatever actions we are putting in place, actually help us also to adapt and also mitigate the effects of climate change. And often at times, research has shown that communities have different capacity to adapt to climate change, and the most vulnerable, the most vulnerable communities are those living in poverty. So poor communities are more vulnerable, which is a fact. And the reason being that, it depends on the infrastructure and also financial capacity of the community. So some people can handle it, some communities can handle it better than other communities. Now, this particular slide shows the continental climate change mitigation and resilience, in terms of how can different continents, also be able to adapt to climate change or mitigate it. And we look at the vulnerability. And if you see on the slide, you will see that Africa, is the most vulnerable in terms of the vulnerability to climate change. And they're also the ones that haven't the average annual percentage change in population is increasing far more than other continents. So that is why a lot of research needs to be done in Africa to see how climate can be mitigated and there could be climate resilience in Africa. So we see countries like Europe, they are doing far, far better, even Americas. And we see even Asia, that used to have a huge amount of population. They are now trying to work on the rate of increase in their population, and their vulnerability also is far better than Africa. I mean, the ability to cope with vulnerability, that vulnerability is far less than Africa. So that shows us that Africa, we have a long way to go in the African continent. Now, this slide basically shows the countries that are best prepared for climate change. And we see most of all the countries here are actually, European countries or the United States of America, so they are developed countries that are more more resourceful, they have the resource to be able to deal with climate change impacts. So there's no African countries, that's actually on this list. So that tells us that there's a lot to do for us to do in Africa. Now, this is some of the pictures showing, there's a few showing the effects of climate change in Africa. And we see that, you see that women are the most vulnerable to it, because they have to travel long distance to get water, and which could be used for something better. And we also see that in the picture here as well, we see that here is a man, because there was flooding, and he had to, his cows are flooded. So he had to start maybe carrying the cows or the goat and walking through the water, and maybe the water is already disease infested. So you see that this is what is actually happening to the vulnerable ones in Africa, which is actually the poor ones. So this is just a small, a little a show of what is going on. So when you go on ground and you see, the amount of devastation that is based on climate change, we see that we need to take action as soon as possible. So now, how do we go about this? Now we need to think about the transdisciplinary approach, for climate management. And the transdisciplinary approach involves science, collaboration, and people. So that means that, yes, science is needed. Often at times we only concentrate on the science aspect of it. But now we also need to think about the collaboration. We need to collaborate with the public needs to collaborate with the private sectors, NGOs, and all stakeholders, that have a stake in the issues of climate change. So, and science needs to be communicated, to the public as well. So science cannot just be that thing that is far away from people from reaching, or maybe even the layman cannot understand the science that we're doing, whether in the research institutions or in our academic institutions. So the science of climate change, must be communicated in such a way that the layman can understand. And the people also need to be brought into this equation as well, because it's the people that is experiencing it, it's the people that is contributing to it. So the awareness and the education of people about this issue needs to be brought to the fore. So I wrote here that the transdisciplinary approach goes beyond the use and application of academic research findings in other sectors. So there has to be societal impact, and participation are crucial aspect of this approach. So any research that we do must have an impact in society. So there's some success stories of this type of collaboration. We have, for example, the indigenous knowledge of the people, about pest-resistant and pest-prone crops was used to develop a technology for better maize production in 3 Ethiopian communities. So what actually happened here is that, they spoke to the people on ground, and they understand, the kind of crops that they've been using that have been able to withstand some drought situation. And they were able to, study further on this type of crops in academic institutions. So we also have the Future Resilient for African Cities and Land project in South Africa, which was used to understand the Southern African regional climate responses to human drivers of climate change. And this has helped to enhance the integration of scientific climate knowledge into city, regional, and municipality decision making. So it's not just that they carry out the research, but they try to also implement it, on the local level. So whatever research we're doing, it has to start from the grassroots level. And also, in Indonesia, there was a traditional project that investigated how renewable energy could be implemented to meet the need and aspiration of rural and remote communities. So they went into the grassroots, they spoke to the people, and they found out what is their need, what is already on ground, so that they can work with what is on ground with the people. Also in Southeast Queensland, Climate Adaptation Research Initiative. This project helps to understand the vulnerability to climate change in that area, and also develop adaptation strategies to assist decision makers in government, industry, and the community. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that research cannot just be done up there. We need to come down to the level of the people. So this is where the collaboration comes from. So the science, the science must fit to what will help the people, and the people's perceptions and understanding of what is going on in the environment must feed into the science loop as well. So what are the challenges, in terms of this interdisciplinary approach? Number one is that there's conflicts. Conflicts easily arise from divergent values, interests, claims of legitimacy, and knowledge claims of transdisciplinary stakeholders. So you see some people, they say, my discipline is more superior, my discipline is more needed in this particular area. So every discipline want to claim that, they are the best. They are the one that can do it better. But if we are going to move forward and we're going to work together, we need to understand that everybody contributes, every discipline actually brings something to the table. There's also this issue of team development and physical interaction of all stakeholders. Could be difficult due to regional and financial constraints. So sometimes you may find out the issue of climate management may involve, people working across regions, and sometimes also lack of money, especially in Africa, may be an issue that may hamper, the issue of climate management. Also, the development of theoretical and practical knowledge and methodologies to adequately execute a project. Now, in doing this kind of transdisciplinary kind of research, it involves, merging different methodologies. That means that the method of one discipline may not just be sufficient. So it may mean that we need to improvise, or we need to scale up some methods to be able to apply it to this new phenomenon that we are confronted with. So those are the something that, yeah?
Sorry, I'm interrupting everybody today. It looks like can I ask you to also wrap it up so that we can maybe have time for a question or two before we finish? That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll quickly go through it. So, and also the career development requirement of researchers also does not favor this kind of thing, because they almost always want to focus on just a specific discipline. And this particular slide shows the kind of challenges, that Africa is facing. And in terms of the climate management, and we see that there's mostly limited institutional capacity. That is the major constraint that has been faced in terms of climate management, and also lack of finance. And here we see that there's many projects now in Africa relating to climate, that is being funded. And most of this funding started from 2006. And there's a lot of money as of 2018 that has been pumped into this project. So what are the possible solutions? We need to think about exchange and integration of knowledge. Academic institutions need to start including performance and promotion measures that encourage researchers to participate in transdisciplinary projects. Funding should be more flexible to accommodate this. And sorry, I think I'm going very fast. And also we need to start learning by doing, and doing by learning as well. So in conclusion, I will say that if proper climate action is taken, it's going to yield better growth and development. Transdisciplinary approach is very important. And according to Paul Pullman, climate change is sometimes misunderstood as being about changes in the weather. In reality, it's about changes in our way of life, okay? And outcomes from research, that is based on my own opinion and my outcome from my research, will not bring about, outcomes from research will not bring about a change unless people are willing to change the way they do things. And I have this funny thing that says, what is the major challenge that we're confronting in terms of managing climate management? Who wants change? Everybody raise up their hands. Who wants to change? Nobody wants to change. So everybody puts their hands down. And who wants to lead this change? You'd find nobody else that wants to do it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Shola. Your last slide has made me laugh out loud over here. It is very true. Thank you so much for that talk. I think the fact, as you said, this is a very complex problem. It needs multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches to solve. I think that has been very much the theme of today's webinar. Everybody's been echoing that we need, to some degree, a bottom-up approach, talking to the communities themselves, but also we need the political will, the political change. And then, Shola, you were also talking about the incentives that we need for researchers, because everybody wants change, but who's going to lead the change unless the incentive is there? Thank you so much. I don't know if there's anybody that would like to quickly ask a question for Prof Ololade before we wrap up our meeting. I have some questions in mind, but I feel I haven't given the floor much chance to speak up in this session today. Is there anybody that would like to ask one question for Prof. Shola Olalade? You can put your hand up or just
okay,
activate
Alisa.
your mic. Yes, go ahead.
I'm Samuel Adelabu. I don't know whether it's a question, but something that has been bothering my mind. Probably we could have some sort of discussion about this. I was with some scientists recently, and we've been talking about this issue of climate change. And let me state upfront that I'm not part of those people who denies the effect or the existence of climate change. But I think, yeah.
Industrialization.
Okay.
Sorry, somebody else had their microphone on.
All right, so can I continue? Okay. All right, my major concern is that as scientists, we are not doing a good job to explain the concept of climate change. I mean, before we can talk about climate adaptation, we must first convince people that there is climate change. And most of the challenges that we are having now is that it's like it's been forced on us to believe that there is climate change. And the golden rule or the golden words nowadays is climate change. So if you go here, if anything happens within the environment, it's as a result of climate change. If this happens, it's as a result of climate change. And you know, IPCC tell us that, for instance, after 30 years, anything that happens or changes like that is like a climate change. But maybe the things that we need to do is that, what do we need to do as scientists, as environmental managers, to actually prove that some of these things are existence? Because if you look at some of the indigenous knowledge that people will say, some people will come.
Sorry, Sam, you want to try again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my major concern is that we had so many people who are talking about climate change, and as scientists, we tend not to prove to them that there is climate change. There are many people, many indigenous people who will contest with us. I am not a denier of climate change. Like I said, I believe that there's climate change, but what do we scientists need to do to show that there is climate change? Currently, we have 30 years intervals, according to IPCC, that if anything's happened in 30 years, then it's climate change. My concern is everything that we hear nowadays is about climate change. If you see a river that dried up, maybe it's just normally dried up with every 25 years, every 30 years. It's climate change. Everybody's, it's like the money, the thing that gets money nowadays. If you want to write a research now, proposal, if you have not put the word climate change in it, it seems that you are not going to get funded. But is there really climate change in some of these things? Maybe it's a discussion. Thank you, Alisa.
Thank you, Sam, for your comment. I think we don't really have time to address and unpack such a meaty comment. So maybe you and Shola, since you are luckily at the same institution, can take that discussion further. And thank you, everybody. We've had a very lively and very informative session today, I believe. And I think a lot of the things raised here will keep on informing future discussions. I hope that we can also continue some discussions on Facebook, where all of these sessions will be posted. So more questions and answers can also be posed there, I hope, and we can continue this fantastic conversation. And of course, it's not just about climate change, as Sam has said, but also about all of the other crises we're currently facing, including the COVID crisis that is closely related, sadly, to climate change. So thank you very much. I appreciate this attendance. I appreciate all 4 speakers. We will share the link to the recording afterwards with everybody, and I hope to see you all again next week, same time, same place, same link, and we'll have a lineup of 4 new exciting speakers. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.